Let's talk about the joy.
Today on Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers, Onika Meyers.
Okay.
Mindfulness coach, yoga international instructor, leader of the Joy Revolution.
Oh my God, that is what I do.
And one of the most inspired voices of love, acceptance, understanding, and change I've ever come across.
This is not the time to back away. It's actually more important than ever that we find ways to connect, to see each other, and to love each other.
And honestly, no intro I could write could ever do this unexpected connection justice. I mean, I didn't expect us to get political, but I love talking politics.
Yeah, me neither.
So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Hi, Onika. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. I am so excited to have you here today. I know your friend and partner, Isabel, and we talked the other day, and when we started talking about you, I just knew I had to have you on the podcast, and I had to hear from you about all the amazing things you are doing in the world, from your Joy Revolution to working as a mindset coach in a really kind of hard, dark space in Rikers, and then just bringing this whole self together. I love how you talk about the whole self as opposed to this best self idea or this better you that gets thrown around so much in the mindfulness community. I love this term that you use, your whole self. So it is a joy to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So let's just jump in. I feel like there's so much to talk about. Let's talk about the joy. What is your Joy Revolution?
Okay. Let's talk about the joy. I think, first of all, I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about all of the things. And let's talk about Joy Revolution. You know, I actually didn't even come up with that term for myself. I was doing a podcast with a friend of mine, and when he introduced me as a joy revolutionist. And I was like, oh my God, that is what I do. And to be seen that way by someone, and I was like, okay, yes, that's what I do. Because I believe in the power of joy, and maybe not joy in some sense of toxic positivity, not forcing yourself to be something that you're not. But I truly believe when we embrace every part of our whole selves, the parts that we don't like, the parts that we're embarrassed of, along with the parts that we're really proud of, we can show up in spaces completely full of joy. And it takes practice. And I especially believe that as a Black woman, in this country, when I can be full of joy, it's like a revolution. And I think for anybody who's part of a marginalized community, whether you're queer, whether you're a cis woman, whether you're trans, and you're all of these things when society is trying to oppress you, but you find your joy, that's revolution. And it's a really powerful transformational tool.
So how do you show up with your joy on a daily basis? I mean, how do you show up and bring that and spread that? Because I mean, it's true. Joy is contagious. Happiness is contagious. A smile is contagious. So what do you do to show up with that joy on a daily basis to help spread it? Because that's what it really sounds like, is to bring about a joy revolution is to just embody and be joy yourself.
Well, I think it starts with love. And when I say love, I mean that the love is a definition that I've adopted from Bell Hooks, who was a feminist, who wrote about love. It's this idea of being accountable, nurturing yourself, having commitment, responsibility, and a sense of trust. And when I do that for myself, I can see that in other people. And that's what connects us. And those kinds of things bring us joy. So whether it's my practice of yoga or meditation or dance or the way that I approach certain things, I bring that mindset to it. And rather than this idea of punishment, of putting myself down, of shaming myself and blaming myself, accepting what's happening in the moment, that gives us joy. And joy, I think, is different than happiness for me. Happiness, I think, is sort of fleeting. and it comes and goes. But joy is a state that we can cultivate, and it's always there. It's an infinite resource. We just simply have to tap into it.
So joy to you is a mindset. It's bringing your mind. And as a mindset coach, that is something you, I guess, teach and share and show. Mm-hmm. So how do you adopt this joyful mindset? I know you mentioned a lot about movement. You're a yoga instructor for Yoga International. Mm-hmm. You mentioned dance. You mentioned when you were talking about it quite a bit about movement. Is that a piece that you need to bring to feel joyful?
Yeah, it can be, but I think the key part is that you know who you are. That's how you find ways to cultivate your joy. That comes from practice, whether it's a sitting practice, whether it's a movement practice. There's this idea of emotional regulation, right? So when we are upset or we're traumatized or something happens, we become dysregulated. So often we don't even know that we're dysregulated. Different practices can help us recognize when we're out of alignment, and then we can find ourselves getting back in an alignment. And I mean physiologically, I don't even just mean from like a woo-woo state. I mean this idea physiologically, our nervous system getting into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest or digest. So practices like breathing, movement, meditation, anything that allows us to relax, that can cultivate a state of joy. And when we can approach that also with that same idea of loving ourselves, because love is also a key component. You have self-love, and then that connection with community and community love. And then you have these tools that you use to regulate yourself so you can understand where you are in any given moment at time.
So how do you do that? How do you cultivate that love? How do you accept your whole self? Because I don't care if you're in a marginalized community. Mm-hmm. I don't care if you're a man. I don't care who you are. We put ourselves down a lot. We are our own worst critics. And I think it's been the systematic thing. We've all come to a place where we do it. So how do we bring about the positives of ourselves out more? How do we cultivate that love for self when there is so much of this putting ourselves down?
So let's first talk about the words even positive or negative. Those are things that to eliminate. Mm-hmm. To say that something is positive automatically has to say that something is negative. I'm talking about accepting every part of ourselves and loving that. So the thing that you're ashamed of, shine light on that. The thing that you're embarrassed that you did, shine light on that. The time that you were angry, shine light on that. There's nothing that has to be outside of the light. That's the way that we cultivate joy, bringing everything that's hidden out into the open and finding ways to love that unconditionally. And that comes from a place of an open heart saying, it's okay. I'm okay that I did this. It doesn't mean that you're not accountable for certain things or that you don't hold people accountable for certain things, but we don't need to hide. And we do so much hiding. Society tells us to, especially women, that our bodies aren't enough or that we need to keep doing things so we can stay young. Instead saying, no, I'm okay now. I'm beautiful as I am now. Like I'm 52 in the throes of a hot flash right now as we're talking because I'm going through menopause. And rather than sort of like fighting any of that, sort of just allowing yourself, no, this is me. And I am okay. I'm completely enough. It takes practice. Like Courtney, it takes so much practice because there's plenty of days I wake up and I'm like, I don't even know why I even teach this stuff because I feel terrible. But here's the thing. I don't tell myself to stop feeling terrible. I am who I am in that moment.
I love that because I talk about this quite a bit. There's this term, especially in the spiritual and mindfulness communities, that talks about being your best self or showing up as your best self or working toward this better version of you. And I really don't embrace that. I don't like it. I like this idea and I'm probably going to steal it, your concept of the whole self, because I was even talking to Isabel the other day about it, saying like, you are your best self now. Like, stop trying to be something other than you are. Be who you are right now, which I struggle with. I come from a place where it's like, I want to put up this facade. Everything's wonderful. Everything's beautiful. Like everything's grand. I worked in television for years. Growing up, I was a performer. I did all these things where it's like this outward appearance that you want to come across perfect. It turned me into a people
Yep.
pleaser and this facade. And that's my mission now, is to help others break down that facade while I'm doing it myself, to really get to know who you are within, because that's how you connect to your heart and that's how you start to love yourself. But how do you do this? So you've done this on quite an interesting level. You were a mindset coach in Rikers Island prison, in the women's prison, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it was actually, the title was Mindfulness Coach. Yeah, and Rikers Island is a jail in New York City, right? And I went to Rikers Island for off and on for 10 years. And I taught in the men's jails, but I spent most of my time full time working in the women's prisons and the women's jail, which had women, non-binary folks, and trans men were all housed in that area.
And so how did you, I mean, you were talking about this concept of like accepting all of this, all of you, the good, the bad, like not saying positive, negative, not saying bad. That is a place where I feel like there is probably a lot of shame or guilt, or maybe there's not, maybe I'm not sure what puts someone in a position to have to go to a place like that. It's something that fascinates me, the mindset behind why you find
Yeah,
yourself in those scenarios.
yeah, we can even talk about that. So I think a big part of this too is recognizing our criminal justice system is actually set up to over police Black and brown communities and poor communities. So there's already a disproportionate amount of Black and brown people who are on Rikers Island in compared to the rest of New York City. 75% of the people on Rikers Island are Black and brown. And we know that 75% of people in New York City are not Black and brown. So those are questions to even ask too. Why is it a majority of Black and brown people who end up at Rikers Island? 75% of people who are Black and brown don't commit crimes. So those are questions to ask too. And so that can even go back, and this is a much longer conversation, which we don't have time for today, but like looking at neighborhoods that are over policed, neighborhoods, and looking at laws that punish people who are poor. Rikers Island is a jail. So it's a place, it's pre-detention. So it's before you go on trial. So a lot of people who are on Rikers are awaiting trial and they can't afford bail, and that's why they're there. Over 85% of the people who are in Rikers can't afford bail, and that's why they're there. There's also a small percentage of people who are serving time less than 1 year who are at Rikers Island. So we think about Rikers Island as being like the worst of the worst people who are there, and it's just simply not true. We're talking about people who are struggling with addiction. We're talking about people who did shoplifting. And I'm not saying that there's not plenty of people who need to be held accountable for things that they've done. But I think there's this misunderstanding that everybody on Rikers is somebody who's committed some terrible crime. And it's just not true. And I think it's important that we start to have conversations about that. Because a lot of the folks who are at Rikers, especially the women. Oh my God, the women, Courtney. Anecdotally, 99% of the women that I worked with have suffered from ongoing abuse, ongoing sexual abuse, ongoing sexual trauma. So there's lots of reasons why people end up in situations where they end up.
So how do you help these women, especially, find themselves and bring that love back? I mean, how do you shift it's hard enough on the outside. It's hard enough not being in a scenario like that to shift your mindset. Like, how do you shift your mindset even in any scenario, that one as well? But you obviously have to work at it.
Yeah. So it's a lot. It's complicated, but let me try to talk about it sort of quickly. So first of all, I stopped thinking of myself as somebody who needed to help these women, right? Because I think there's this great essay, if you haven't read it, by Rachel Naomi Remen, called Helping versus Fixing and Serving. Or Helping, Fixing, and Serving is the name of the essay. And the implication is that helping comes from a place of being condescending, where we think that people are broken. But when we serve from the soul. So, and service is seeing people as whole. So I realized that people are already whole. And I think that it's important that people understood that I was there to bear witness to this experience that they're having, because this is simply a moment in time, right? And to love up on somebody in this moment in time can be incredibly powerful. Sometimes it's the first time that people have experienced this kind of love. Sometimes it's just saying, I see you and I know that you miss your kids, and I know that you're worried about your kids, or I know that you lost your job. So those are the kinds of things that I did. And whether they helped or not, I think sometimes they did, but I actually stopped worrying about that and just was like, I'm just this big container for people to do what they need to do to be seen and felt and loved and heard. What they do with that after is kind of their business and their responsibility, which is, that was the hardest part, right? Like when we're serving somebody, we want to know what the outcome is. But the truth is, that's not our business. Our business is taking care of us. So the thing that I did best when I was at Rikers was love myself even more, so that could be an example for people.
That comes back to what I've been taught from my teacher, is this whole concept of mind your business. And it prompted that in my mind. Like, it is your business. You have to take care of yourself. Mind your business. What someone else does with their life, what someone else says, what someone else does, it's not your business. It's their business. And that's not to be selfish or self-centered.
Nope.
It's just put your focus within, put your focus on you, and give what you can to others. So essentially in this space, you are holding space for these women or these people to go through whatever transition or transformation they needed in that time. And unfortunately, they were under not great circumstances.
Right.
But why do you think,
Right.
I mean, it's fascinating though, this whole concept of, you were talking about the Black and brown communities being marginalized and put, which I think we're all very well aware of, or at least if you're conscious of anything going on in this world, you should be well aware of that. Why do you think there is a lack? I don't even know. Is there a lack of mindfulness in these communities? Like, is there a space that you need
I don't think so.
we need to spread it more?
No, that's a great question. And no, I don't think there is. I don't think it necessarily looks the way that dominant culture says that it looks, right? Like Black and brown and indigenous communities have rich traditions of connection and of mindfulness. And I think for a lot of us who through generations were taught to sort of assimilate and maybe forget parts of our culture, we've stepped away from that, which is why Isabel and I ended up connecting, and we do something like Motherland, where we're two BIPOC women who talk about reclaiming our traditions and spirituality so we can embrace this sense of wholeness. So it might not look like a sitting meditation, but you know, if you go to Black barbershops in a Black neighborhood, and that sense of community amongst the men, and talking and laughter and connection and history and love, that is nourishing. That is healing. It's an important thing that happens. Or a hair salon, or when people get together and they can just be themselves. Those kinds of things are really nourishing for all of us. And I think we need to think about how we reframe this idea of what wellness is in the first place. That it's not something that we have to pay for. It's not something that we have to, spend a lot of money on clothes. That when you and I, Courtney, we are together right now in community, having conversations, learning about each other, this is nourishing. This is a mindful conversation that we're having, and this can cultivate and ripple out and cultivate great change in the world. And I think if we start to recognize that for other communities that they are doing that, we will stop putting on ideals of what we think people should be doing or how they should move.
Well, it sounds almost like you're saying that, the whole mindfulness movement has become this commercialized product almost, and that we need to get back to the roots of it, what it really is.
Absolutely. When you think about the roots of certain practices, like loving kindness is a meditation that I love, and that comes from Buddhism. And it's like here in the United States, we tend to rip away the culture from certain traditions and don't honor where they come from. Like yoga. yoga coming from South Asian roots. It's really important to acknowledge that. And all of the teachers who brought us yoga, Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, the Buddha who brought us loving kindness, all of these things are incredibly powerful, and we can't strip the spirituality out of that. And I don't know if it was fear that people thought that it would be rejected, or there was this sense of there could only be one way that we looked at these things, or people wouldn't buy these practices. But I talk about them from their roots because we have to honor that, because that is a part of the tradition.
I absolutely love that. So I spent quite a bit of time in New Orleans, and I always talk about that. You know, it is very rich with culture. It is very rich with history. There is a soulness about it. And it was going into not the tourist bars, going into like the local jazz bars and going back to the roots of like, that is mindfulness, being in, hearing that Zydeco music and just the dancing and the movement and the community, I think is a lot of what you're talking about. And when we can get back to that culture and where these things come from, I think there's a lot that we can learn. I'm just talking about it. You know, I can feel the energy coming through me, and we need to stop commercializing it. It's not about going to yoga 6, which great. That could be wonderful if that's where you do your yoga practice, but it's really getting in touch with like why we're doing it, what we're looking for. So what are you doing with Yoga International to help bring that about?
So I love working with Yoga International. So a lot of the classes that I teach on Yoga International are taught from my perspective of joy. And this idea of embracing the wholeness of who we are. And I don't talk a lot about, oh, you need to do this to be in a perfect pose. I talk about how you're feeling inside when you're moving. How do you feel after your practice? I did a couple of classes that were strictly related to menopause. So for women who are transitioning in that point in their life, and how can we embrace this rather than pushing back and fighting against it, even through like the challenging parts of it. So that's a lot of what I brought to Yoga International, and a lot of what I just bring to my teaching. Whether I did the same thing at Rikers, like when I worked with people at Rikers one-on-one, sometimes it was like a traditional yoga class, like a private yoga class or private mindfulness class that I would do with folks. But it was this idea of connecting ourselves with the present moment, allowing ourselves to acknowledge what was happening and to let light be there and to not judge it. And to simply just let it be. And I think that's the way that I teach now. And I think when I learned to teach from that place, it shifted something inside of me. And I lost some students. There are plenty of people who want to go to a yoga class and be bossed around and told what to do and not think. And that's okay for them. But that wasn't the way that I taught anymore. And it shifted things. I gained a lot of students and lost a lot of students.
Well, how do you touch base? So one thing you did mention was getting to know and how you feel. Now, this is something that's come about in my mind lately, is this whole concept of connecting to how you feel. That's where your intuition lies. That's where you get that inner knowing and that inner self comes through. But I think that gets confused now with this concept of emotions. Like, don't be emotional. So people want to shut off their emotions, and then they're not feeling. But feeling doesn't necessarily mean to emote. It means to understand what's happening within you, correct? So how do we really embrace the concept of this feeling and knowing without this, like, I can't show my emotions, which I think it's great to show your emotions. I think you should be free with it. But where, like, I feel like there's a disconnect there.
So this is where practice comes in, right? So it's learning how to, and this is where I think it's important to work with teachers, our community, or read books so you understand where you're starting from. So like right now, I do like a check-in, right? Before I'm teaching a class. And so you ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? And not using words like good or bad or fine, but using descriptive words. Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I anxious? Am I frustrated? Am I disappointed? Am I disgusted? Naming those things and then allowing them just to be there just as they are without having to fix or change them. When we can start to identify feelings with words, they don't have to necessarily have power over us or feel very overwhelming, and we can allow them to be there. I liken the practice to having a very large bowl in front of you. And very often we're told that we can only feel one or two ways. So when we feel more than one or two ways, we feel constricted. But instead, allow the bowl to get bigger. So you can be happy and sad at the same time. You can be angry and disappointed and excited at the same time. You don't have to leave anything out. So make that bowl as big as you need to make it so you can have all of the feelings in there, and then we don't feel constricted.
Where do you think we came up with this, where we just put such importance on like what like the meaning is as opposed to just accepting? Like, where did we lose this acceptance of just what is?
I think focus on capitalism and productivity really focused on this idea that people always need to be producing. So we started to think of things in very black and white terms and in a binary, and there was no room, right? If we're only thinking about productivity and making things and making money and making this wheel go round and round and round, there's not a lot of room for contemplation or reflection or expression. So we squash that stuff. We really say, like, take the business world, corporate America, for example. I worked in corporate America for 20 years. You weren't allowed to be anything but one way. You were direct. You were a leader. If you showed emotion, you were being weak and you were a problem and you had to go to HR. If you were angry, there was a problem. And if you were angry and you were a woman, you know, there was a bigger problem with that because there were ways that you had to act as a woman in leadership. But now that I think there's this shift where we're allowing ourselves to say, like, hey, I can feel a bunch of different ways. And if I'm in corporate America and feeling a bunch of different ways, and the folks who are on my team can see that, that's actually really empowering. And it can really transform company culture.
So it's like accepting that you can be vulnerable. You can show who you are. You can show your emotions. It allows a safe space for everyone to be where they are and where they're going. But do you believe that there's a shift in consciousness happening now?
I do. I actually think there's a huge one happening now. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of what we're seeing. I think what we're seeing are sort of the death throes of an old culture. And that's why there's this huge backlash and this huge pushback, because, you know, just before something dies, right, it does everything it can to try to stay alive. It's cornered. So it thrashes back and pushes back and gets really violent. And I think if we just all stay the course, we will see that a shift is coming. And I actually think it's been coming for like 100 years, to be honest with you. And I think now it's just kind of coming to a head. But I think more than ever, people like you and me and Isabel and people who believe in this idea of love being transformative have to double down on that. This is not the time to back away. It's actually more important than ever that we find ways to connect, to see each other, and to love each other.
Which, when you are in this space and you are trying to double down on that and you are trying to bring more light to it, I feel like more resistance comes. You know, it's kind of like this fight, like, no, we can do, but you have to keep that commitment. I know my teacher and I talk a lot about the divine feminine. It's time for the divine feminine to come in. And there's this idea that she's like, the divine feminine isn't Beyonce and high heels. It's connecting to your heart, connecting to your inner self, getting to know your intuition, and it's coming forward now. And if you are not on board, then you're going to be left. You're going to be left behind. It's kind of like when, you know, everyone said the world was flat, like, get on board. The world is round. We're moving in this direction. So what do you think it looks like as we step more into this consciousness and more into this openness that's happening?
I think it's going to look like more violence, if you want me to be really honest. I think there's going to be a lot more pushback. I do for a little bit. I do. I think things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. But that's what happens. If you think of a butterfly busting out of a chrysalis, it's not a beautiful process. It is very painful. It is very challenging. So I think we're at that point where the chrysalis is breaking. And it doesn't mean that we can't find joy in that. And this is why I think it's so important that we don't try to resist or pretend that things aren't happening. We can allow them to happen. You know, I started on this path because I was in a yoga class in Manhattan, and a teacher said, you can change or be comfortable, but you can't do both things at the same time. And
Mhm.
it rocked my world. And I truly believe that we're in the midst of change. So it's not comfortable, and it's not going to be comfortable. And I don't know who told us in the first place that change was actually something that was really cozy, because it's not.
Mm-mm. Well, growth isn't comfortable. I mean, if you want to
Right.
grow, and that is one thing that I've talked a lot about on the thing in my videos and things I do is like, if you want to grow, if you are living, you have to get uncomfortable, because growth doesn't happen in your safety zone. Like, it's uncomfortable. It's something new. We're moving into a new era. So you foresee more violence and more resistance
And
coming
by
as this,
violence, I
because
mean,
it's almost
do
like,
I mean actual physical? Maybe. But I think, yes, by violence, I mean resistance. I mean pushback. I think we are going to see that. I think we're going to see more people having very challenging conversations with folks who aren't ready to embrace this. I actually think that is going to happen. And I think it is really important that folks who have a sense of who they are, right? Because I don't think we're better than people who don't move this way, but I think there's a
Mhm,
difference, and I think it becomes important too not to have a sense of condescension towards those who are
mhm,
struggling, because that is something too that I used to see in the spiritual and wellness world. It was like,
mhm,
I'm elevated and I'm enlightened, so I'm here and you're here because you're just beginning. Those things I think are really divisive. So I think it is this idea of saying, like, yeah, I see where you are and I honor where you are. And you might be in a place where you're causing harm and I need to put down a boundary. And I don't even like you. I don't think that you have to like people to love them. I think that's also a problem. We're so obsessed with this idea of being liked all the time, that everybody has to like me. And the way that I teach, everybody has to like it. Not everybody has to like me. I don't even care if everybody likes me or not. I love everybody though. And I do believe that everybody has a right to exist in a way that's not harmful. That I think is really important. People who have completely polar opposite feelings than I do should be allowed to exist, as long as they aren't causing harm to my physical body. That is okay.
well, so how do you group that? How do you group this, like wanting to be liked and wanting to be accepted, with this constant push for an inclusion? I mean, I know you experience that, from being, a Black woman, being a gay woman. Like, how do
Mm-hmm.
you? I don't even
Mm-hmm.
know if I'm saying that. I know you said queer versus gay. Like, I personally, I don't even know,
Yeah.
like, I know there's different
So
dynamics
I
to that.
think
So,
when
like,
we're
what does
talking
that mean?
Yeah, I think when we're using the word inclusion doesn't necessarily have to mean that I agree with every single thing that you do or say, but I am allowing you to exist without being harmed. And and this is where I think it's very challenging for people on both sides of the spectrum, the left and the progressive left and the right, to understand that there is this obsession with, I need you to think exactly how I do in order
Yeah.
for me to say that you can exist. I do not agree with that. And that is going to be an unpopular opinion with lots of progressive people. And I think I have been so afraid to say those things for a very long time, but I mean it. And you don't have to agree with me. You don't. But you have to allow me to exist without being harmed. You need to make sure that if other people are trying to harm me, as a part of being of collective society, you protect that right and I protect your right to exist. Like, those are the agreements that we have being a civilized society, but you don't have to like it, and that's okay. And I think social media is a big part of this obsession with getting likes, that we equate,
Mm.
a heart or a like with acceptance and with tolerance. And it's not the same thing. Its popularity is not the same thing as love.
I love what you're saying, because so I grew up in San Diego, which is a very, is very more towards the right. I worked in Hollywood. I lived in LA for 20 some odd years. Now I live in Tennessee. So I've experienced a lot of these far extreme, and even working in Hollywood, I saw it in a very very much extreme, there it's very liberal, it's very progressive left pushing that agenda. So I've seen all the different agendas, and I don't care what your opinion is. This is the one thing that's always driven me absolutely bonkers, is we are allowed to have separate opinions. Like, we have gotten so far away from the right to have free speech and opinion. I don't believe in hurting anyone, but like, I don't have to believe the same way as someone else. And we need to be accepting of that, as opposed to pushing these agendas on people, where whatever agenda you have, I don't care. Let's just be open and accepting of it all. So I love that you are actually saying that, because that is lost. And it's so polarized, I feel like.
It is lost. And I think that is why we're seeing so much scary legislation being pushed out, because there's this pushback from the right thinking that this is how they're legislating what they think is free speech, and progressives pushing back against all of that, because it's the same tools. Audre Lorde was she was actually identified as a lesbian feminist, Black lesbian feminist writer. And she said the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. So we need to think about a new way and reimagine a new way of being together that allows people to exist and to be free from harm, to be free from being over policed, from being free from being able to express themselves the way that they want, and calling people in with love and holding them accountable, rather than calling them out and isolating them from society, which both sides are very good at doing. And we need to learn how to have nuanced conversations that can make us a little bit uncomfortable, because I think there is a difference between discomfort and harm. I think we're quick to say, like, you're harming me with your words, rather than understanding I'm just uncomfortable with what you're saying. And being in, and it's challenging to say that, being who I am, because I get afraid that that is going to be rearranged as me agreeing with what the right is saying. And yet I still have to say this because I believe it. So it's like a difficult and interesting line that I'm walking, saying these things, right? But I do believe them to be true. I do not believe that, somebody who completely disagrees with who I am as a person isn't allowed to live. I do have a problem if they're a congressperson and they're enacting a law saying that I'm not allowed to marry my partner, right? That's the difference. Like, that's when we gotta have a conversation.
Well, and I think that's where a lot of this old archaic stuff is getting broken down, where we're talking about the revolution, where we're talking about the fight. Because, if you look at, I didn't expect us to get political, but I love talking politics.
Me neither.
We were supposed to have a mindfulness spiritual conversation today, and here we are going down this road of politics. But at the core, it's like, you look at the political realm, look at who is running things. And I know that this has been talked about ad exhaustion, but like, we have to open that up. And it's not just these extremists. It's not the AOCs of the world that are going to come in and just be this loud, disruptive voice, which is great, to have those disruptors in there. But it's just the normal is a bad word. It's the everyday people that are open to having these conversations that we need to see in there.
Nuanced conversations. Yes. Nuanced conversations are important. Conversations where you are allowed to stumble, Courtney, and say something that you didn't mean to say. And I'm not like, oh, yeah, I'm writing her off because she said this. We have to be able to do that. And I don't know if it's because I'm 52. And so, I understand, you know what I mean? Like, I'm stepping into my auntie vibe. So, I understand that I've lived a little bit, and I know that I've had to learn. I am not who I was when I was in my 20s. I'm different, and that's a good thing. And I have wisdom that I didn't have. And I appreciate so much of what youth is talking about and what they're doing. And I also want to have conversations with them when I think that they're sort of like going off the path. But I wouldn't have wanted to have those conversations with my 50-year-old self when I was in my 20s. So, but I love I love being comfortable in my skin to be able to have these conversations and not feel like if somebody doesn't agree with me, it's like going to take me under and ruin my year, you know?
Well, I think there's more people out there like you or like me that are open to having these conversations, that are open to having these ideas. It's just the fear-based society pushes us out, pushes the normal conversation out to the extremes. And I think that's where we're going to start seeing the busting of everything is, you know, hopefully the majority of us are getting tired of it, getting tired of this establishment and this one way, this way or that way. And we can be more open. And I think that's maybe the shift in consciousness that's happening, being more open to have these conversations, because I do think we need to accept everyone has different walks of life they come from. Everyone has different experiences. And like you said, at 52, you look at things way different than those 20-year-olds. It doesn't mean that they don't have something good to bring to the conversation, but you can absorb it in a different way. And I love that you call yourself the auntie, because that's, you know, it is. Your auntie's a safe space to talk to. And I love that.
Mhm.
I love
Yes,
what you're
because
doing.
aunties were the safe space. Yeah, they weren't the mom. I'm not old enough to be an elder yet, and hopefully I make it to that place. But I do think that I've gotten I've earned a little bit of right to say what I need to say because I am in my 50s. I've been through stuff. I've seen things. And I want to be a place that people can have conversations and also be lovingly called in if they say something that's stupid, and calling me in if I say something stupid.
So what does that look like? How do you approach that? Like, how do you approach someone that's like, no, you're like totally off base? Like, how do you approach it with love?
Well, I will tell you that I've had conversations with some of my relatives who I can't even remember exactly what happened, but one of my relatives said something that felt a little homophobic unintentionally. And I said something about it. And I was like, hey, just so you know, saying something like that isn't really cool anymore. And I I think that you should think about that. And we went back and forth. She got very defensive, and I didn't come back with being defensive or anger. I was like, listen, and I think I sent like an article or something on what she said. I wish I could remember. And then there was back and forth going on in our family WhatsApp chat. and then
Mm.
um and then it came to a place like, I see what you're saying now, and I'm sorry, and I won't say that again. And I think it was because I wasn't like, I'm never talking to you again because you said this thing, and it does require skill. It requires us to say, when I hear something that makes me feel a certain way, I say, okay, let me process that. Let me look at the person who's saying it. Let me understand that they are probably saying this wanting to show up as the best person that they are, and they made a mistake. And I can respond in such a way, like that's a way to do that. Now, if it's physical violence coming at you, we have to protect ourselves and do something different. But lots of times I feel like we have to understand how to regulate ourselves in our body. So when something comes, we don't let that thing take us under. We have control of how we respond.
Well, we're so quick to cancel. I mean, it's been talked about a lot, the cancel culture. We're so quick to just,
Mm-hmm.
I'm done. I'm canceling you. You're out. I mean, my husband and I were talking about it last night I think I saw an ad for the newest Bachelorette come on, and we it led down that conversation of Chris Harrison, how he just got canceled. And we're like, where'd he go? What happened? It's just, we are so quick to cancel, and it's sad. I think it's sad. I think we need to be more open-minded, open to conversations, open to understanding where people come from. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's accepted.
Everybody's
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's accepted. I don't know why we're like okay with it.
Yeah. Everybody's canceling everybody. The right is canceling people for not being Republican enough. Progressives are canceling people for not being progressive enough. There is just this sense of if you aren't in 100% in alignment with everything that I'm saying, I can't be with you. But I'll tell you, Courtney, you know what that really is saying? I am not loving myself 100%. And since I can't do that, I can't accept you. We know that that's what's really going on. And that's why we have to keep having these conversations about how do I love myself? Because when I can do that, I can love you.
We need to get in alignment with ourselves. So you are having these conversations on Motherland. Tell me about your podcast. Where can we find it? Talk about what's coming up.
So on Motherland, that I do co-host with Isabel Frankie, we discuss spirituality through our lens. She's brown, I'm black, I'm newer. I say newer on my spiritual journey, but I think I've probably been on it my whole life. But I think I'm new to coming out and talking about it, and trusting my intuition and different practices that I have, and reclaiming of some traditions that, I that just wasn't really talked about when I was growing up. And so we have conversations through that lens, and it's been a really nourishing experience. And it's been really fascinating how well it's been received by folks. That we talk about things, I think, in a way that's really conversational, just like the two of us, like having a cocktail or a cup of coffee or tea at a kitchen table. Like we are literally just talking.
And where can we find it? Where can we listen to it?
You can stream Motherland wherever you listen to your podcasts. With new episodes drop every week. Our episode this week was, we did an interview with Mariko Frederick, who is the CEO of Soul Priority. And it was a really incredible conversation about our soul archetypes. So we interview folks about who they are, and what they're doing in the world. We have conversations about where we are in our journey. And it's been an experience that I'm so grateful that I've been able to have. Very different from a lot of the other work I was doing before.
Wonderful. And if we want to do any of your meditations or learn from you from your yoga practice, where can we find that?
You can find me on Yoga International. You can also go to my website, onikamaze.com. And soon I will, my YouTube, you can follow me on YouTube. I don't have a lot up there yet, but we'll have a lot of practices there soon.
I absolutely love it. Oh my goodness. I know. I feel like I can really I feel like we could have gone down a rabbit hole today and talked about a lot of these
I feel like we could probably talk for hours.
I know. I want to sit down and have a cocktail with you and have more of these conversations because we are coming from different places, but we're also not. And I think if more of us can see that, we can see more of our similarities, but we do have different points of view and different experiences to bring to the table. And it just turns into such a beautiful conversation. Took us down a path I didn't even expect. And I really, really, really appreciated it.
This was such a joy. I am so glad we got to have this conversation. I did not expect this conversation either, but you know what? Those are the best things. Those are the best conversations. And I think that's how change ends up happening, when you allow yourself to to be with whatever emerges.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Onika. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I really hope we get to talk and connect soon. I'll be in New York in the fall, so maybe we'll cross paths.
Oh, I would love it. I would love it. Thank you so much, Courtney.
Awesome. I'll talk to you soon. And that's it for today's Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Thank you so much, Onika Meyers, for the great conversation. We took it down roads I did not expect, and I cannot be more ecstatic. I love talking to her. You can find all her information in the show notes, how to find her on Yoga International, how to find her podcast, Motherland. And as always, you can find the Intentional Home and Living at CourtneyMyers.com. Like I've been talking about, intentional media, our announcements are going to be coming soon, so keep a lookout for that. It'll be on the website, on our YouTube, and on all of our social channels. So thank you so much once again for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.